Hey everyone, hope you've been doing well. Today I'm going to be going over my top 5 albums of February. Yes, I'm aware that March is almost over. I'm a full-time college student with unmedicated ADHD, so bear with me. I might be a little behind schedule sometimes. As usual, all the albums talked about in this video will be linked down in the description below, as well as some honorable mentions that didn't quite make my top 5. So, without further ado, let's get right into it. At number 5, we have Choke Enough, the debut LP from French alt-pop musician Oklou. Oklou made waves back in 2020 with her Galore mixtape, and on this debut record, she is coming through with a very Y2K-inspired, mellow, spacey, electronic pop sound, filtered through the lens of like modern hyperpop and cloud rap, so we get this like combination of sounds that's just very refreshing and airy and light on the ears. Moments in the first half of the record that really stood out to me include Thank You for Recording, which has these really nice, bouncy, cute little synth chirps, which pair well with Lou's falsetto singing. I also really like the distant, far-off horn melody in the song ICT, as well as the ethereal, almost like dungeon synth-esque production on the track Family and Friends, which includes what I think is a marimba in the instrumental, which I thought was pretty cool. The middle and the second half of the record, while overall not as strong as the beginning, still contains some of the album's best and most catchy songs, such as Take Me By the Hand featuring Blade, as well as Harvest Sky featuring hyperpop artist Underscores, which does this very 90s style Eurotrance throwback kind of thing, and does it very well. This track manages to up the energy on the album while simultaneously fitting in with the low-key vibe of the rest of the tracks, and honestly, I think it might be one of Oklou's best songs yet. But I wouldn't quite say it's her best song yet, because personally, my favorite track from this record was the closer, Blade Bird. This song really stood out to me on my first listen to this record, and it has gradually become one of, if not my favorite songs of the year so far. I cannot describe how much of a good vibe this song is. Everything from the bedroom-style production to the layered acoustic guitars, one being very organic and the other one being more glitchy and edited, as well as the smooth, layered vocals that just create this gorgeous, really ethereal effect. And of course, the adorable yet bittersweet lyrics about feeling like a burden in a relationship and worrying about confining your partner like a bird in a cage even though you don't mean to. It's just so sweet and emotional and loving, and it's everything. It's just everything. I love this song. Honestly, for as much as I love the sound of this record and the various different styles it explores throughout its tracks, I would love to hear like an EP or an album that's just like purely in this sort of acoustic electronic fusion style, because I think Oklou does it really well. So overall, this is a great project, maybe a little bit weak towards the middle, and maybe just a little bit too sparse at times. But with that said, I feel like it effectively accomplishes the vibe it's going for. And what matters most is that as a debut album, it shows a lot of potential and makes me excited to hear more from Oklou going forward. At number 4, we have an album that is just as chill and just as soothing, albeit in a very different style, that being Luminescent Creatures from Ichiko Aoba. This is the 8th studio album from Japanese singer-songwriter Ichiko Aoba, who has come to be known for her very soothing, comforting brand of folk music, which over time has come to incorporate more elements of new age and ambient music, which adds a sort of lush, ethereal atmosphere to her sound. This was very much the direction of her last full-length record, Windswept Aiden, from 2020, which received a lot of critical praise upon release. This new album is very much in the same vein, with the biggest difference being that I think she is going even further into her new age influences, with a few tracks even foregoing her typical acoustic guitar-based instrumentation in favor of more minimal ambient soundscapes. In particular, the third track, Mazaman, is this very sweet lullaby-esque track. The gentle singing and the progression of the track really makes me feel like I'm just drifting off into this mystical dream world. Upon first listening to it, I thought to myself, this is some of the most effortlessly beautiful, gentle, lush music I've ever heard, and the fact that it is so minimal and so stripped back makes it all the more effective in that regard. Following this, we have the mainly piano-based song Tower, which takes on an almost like jazzy, traditional pop-esque approach, which was an unexpected direction for this record, to me anyway, but I think it fit in quite well with her sound, and I think she did it well. But I'm getting a bit ahead of myself because I want to go back and talk about the opening track, Coloratura, which has probably the most lively and lush instrumentation on the whole record, including everything from a harp to a flute, piano, guitar, of course, layered ethereal vocals. It's absolutely a highlight for me and acts as a great sort of fantastical, whimsical tone setter for the record. And what I think is cool is that later in the record you have the song Luciferine, which brings back a lot of that lush instrumentation from Coloratura, but does so in a more restrained, drawn-out kind of way, more like the rest of the record. And I don't know, it's just a cool way of calling back to the song, but in a less grandiose, less lively kind of way. And while we're talking about the second half of the record, I should mention the indie folk ballad Flag, which has probably my favorite guitar playing on the record, as well as these just gorgeous, soul-cleansing vocal harmonies. It's just incredible. In a lot of ways, I think this album is maybe a bit too similar to Windswept Aiden, so it might not be her most ambitious work yet, but I still think this is a very cohesive, very wonderful, very nice on the ears, pleasant listening experience. I've been returning to this record a lot when I need something that is just gentle and nice on the ears and just makes me feel warm and fuzzy inside. And if you're looking for that vibe, I would highly recommend checking this album out, as well as her many other great albums. At number 3, we have Tir Na Nog, the third EP from UK band Maruja, a group that has gained traction in recent years amongst fans of the darker, more experimental side of rock music, doing a tried and true combination of post-rock, art rock, post-punk, post-hardcore, little bit of jazz and prog in the mix. If you've been paying attention to the UK windmill scene, as it's called, with bands like Black Country New Road and Squid, then you'll know precisely the sound I'm talking about. What I think really helps Maruja stand out amongst their contemporaries is their willingness to challenge themselves with each new release they put out. For example, their second EP compared to their first EP had a much more punk-oriented sound, and towards the end of last year they put out a 90-minute compilation record on Bandcamp featuring various iPhone recordings of their favorite jam sessions from the past few years, showing that not only are they great songwriters, but they also have a ton of chemistry as just a jam band. And this new EP here might be their most unique and ambitious work yet, as it combines those improvisational elements with, more structured compositions, really going hard on the band's jazz and prog side, while also incorporating a lot of space rock, which gives the album this really dark, ominous, otherworldly feeling. The record is essentially a 22-minute suite split into 4 parts, with the saxophonist kind of being the band leader, sort of happening on top of everything else going on, leading the band and the listener from one musical idea to the next. We start off with a very continuous build in the song Aeon, which just keeps getting more and more intense, bringing in these wordless, spiritual vocals. By the end of it, everything is just a chaotic flurry of noise and just crazy saxophone soloing, which transitions well into the next track, Do, which takes a slightly more straightforward approach to that sound. I especially love the propulsive, rhythmic groove that the band locks into towards the end of the track. Following that, we have Tree, which is the shortest of the 4 tracks, which goes in sort of a more drony, kind of dark ambient direction. It's definitely the most bleak and apocalyptic moment on the record, but it then builds up momentum again for the final track on the record, Cythere, which is probably the most straightforward and accessible track. Structurally, this track is kind of like the first one in that it's sort of just a continuous build, only this time instead of getting more chaotic and strange and all over the place, it maintains a steady groove throughout and mostly places emphasis on just jamming. You have this psychedelic acid sort of guitar solo playing off of the saxophonist, and it just creates this really cool juxtaposition. Like I said, it's probably the most chill and accessible moment on the EP, and it makes for a very satisfying ending. Personally, I think this is Maruja's most compelling and unique and incredible work yet, and when they do eventually drop a studio album, I hope they don't entirely abandon this sort of like semi-improvised quality to their music, because I imagine to some degree they'll go back to writing more traditional songs, but like, this is really cool, and I want to hear it incorporated in whatever they do next. But regardless of what's coming next, I can say that I'm along for the ride, I'm on the edge of my seat, and I think if you check out this band's music, you will be too. Now, my top 2 albums from this month, while very different in tone and style, both fall under the general emo/hardcore umbrella, which, as I'm sure most of you have gathered by now, is kind of my bread and butter. However, of all the new music in these styles that I consume regularly, these 2 EPs really stood out to me as examples of bands having a very deep understanding and appreciation for what makes their respective styles so great. So believe me, I'm not just biased. These records really are the cream of the crop. At number 2, we have Of Eden with A Chapter Worth Reading. Man, there must be something in the water in fucking Texas right now, because they just keep churning out these insanely good post-hardcore, emo, metalcore kind of bands. Cinema, Rosa Sharon, Her Love Beheads Daisy. No, wait, they're not. Are they Texas? Bullets Between Tongues, and Of Eden are just the latest addition to that roster. This debut EP showcases a very well-crafted, fully formed sound that simultaneously seems like it could have come straight out of the mid-2000s while also being unique enough that it feels separate from that era and kind of like it's doing its own thing. When I listened to this record, the most obvious influence that stood out to me first and foremost was the classic metalcore band Seven Angels, Seven Plagues, particularly their more emo side. But on top of that, I hear influence from the likes of Hope's Fall or Define the Great Line era Underoath in terms of its very chilling, sort of ethereal atmosphere. Damn, I really say ethereal way too much. It's just such a good word. Plus, it pulls some very clear songwriting cues from post-hardcore groups like Seosin or Alexis on Fire, and maybe even just a little bit of like There Is a Hell era Bring Me the Horizon. Especially on the vocal end, I feel like the vocalist kind of does this like melodic, cathartic sing scream that's reminiscent of Ollie Sykes, just a little bit. But what I really love about the way Of Eden combines these influences is that they're not just riff savvy. They very clearly seem to have a strong grasp of the progressive songwriting styles that made these old classic bands so incredible in the first place. They really do go above and beyond with these epic, cathartic song structures, with a generous yet tasteful use of clean guitar passages, which act as much needed breathers and segues between these massive, cathartic, dissonant chords and crushing mosh pit ready breakdowns. There's also this stunningly gorgeous fucking instrumental track halfway through the EP. Like, seriously, this isn't just some random interlude. This is like some incredible Jasmine's Lullaby level piano stuff. If you know, you know. It's this constantly building progressive piece played on like this old worn piano with birds chirping outside. And I don't know if it's something about the production or if it's just the piece itself, but there's just this beautiful atmosphere to it that is hard to describe unless you hear it for yourself. But on the topic of production, going back to the heavy songs in this record, there is this very cold, gothic kind of atmosphere throughout these tracks that is really unique. Like, it's not like I haven't heard other bands attempt this sort of thing, but Of Eden just does it so well. The best way to describe the sound and aesthetic of this album on the production end is that it sounds exactly how the cover looks. But yeah, if you can't tell by how much I'm gushing about it, this is one of the most impressive, cohesive debut projects I've heard from a metalcore band in a long time. If you're a fan of this style, I highly recommend checking it out, and even if it's not something you're super into or familiar with, or if it's something you want to get more into, I would honestly recommend this EP still, because it's very consistent, just under 20 minutes long, very digestible, pretty catchy. So like, if you're looking for a gateway into metalcore and post-hardcore, this could honestly be it. Now finally, at number 1, we have an album that probably will end up in my top 5 for the end of the year. I love this record so much. That being Hands in the Air by Told Not to Worry. This is the debut album from Rhode Island's screamo band Told Not to Worry, who have proven themselves to be, both through this record and the 3 songs they released last year, to be one of the most exciting new groups in this style. So, full disclosure, I do know these guys somewhat personally. I've seen quite a few of their shows. I've played a few shows with them with my band, and I actually just did a pretty chill, laid-back interview with them that is probably going to be up on the channel in about a few days. And I feel like knowing them and knowing the trajectory that they've taken thus far makes the context for this record all the more interesting, because the 3 songs they put out last year all showcased like a more like slow, atmospheric, melodic form of screamo. And on this record, which is 8 tracks long, 10 minutes in length, they've done a full 180 into sassy, whitebelt emoviolence with insane bass-boosted metalcore breakdowns. Just a whole lot of furious energy and rage. And while it may be easy for some to just listen to this record and chalk it up to simply a revival of that 2000s MySpace grind sound, compare it to Heavy Heavy Lolo and call it a day, to those in the know, it quickly becomes very apparent that there is a lot more influence than that going into this album. For starters, I think the band's origins as a more restrained, melodic screamo band actually inform a few moments on this record, particularly the songs Jane is a Vampire and Punk Girl at a Rock Show, which sound a lot more like 90s emo violence bands like Orchid and Page 99 than they do anything sasscore or metalcore adjacent. Compare that to the side-to-side mosh sequences in the pro-Palestine anthem Our Time Will Come, or the weirdo Black Eyes-esque dance punk intro leading into this like insane, almost like deathcore-esque breakdown on I Killed Barbie. And you can start to kind of piece together the various influences going into this record. I feel like the first track on the album, Tonight We Die in Battle, is a real highlight, and it's partially because I think it does a great job of like encapsulating everything going on in this record into one 2-minute song. The first half of the song is a lot more in that 90s vein, with clean guitar breaks and very personal lyrics detailing the narrator's conflicting feelings about a person in their life, before saying, "So shut the fuck up," and then going into this super nasty metalcore breakdown. It's just this seamless transition into like a similar but also very different vibe, and it's just awesome. To wrap this up, I'll say that what I really love about Told Not to Worry, beyond just their stylistic creativity, which is that no matter what they're talking about, whether it's a personal topic, a political topic, or something else, they're going to inject like a real sense of just fun and insanity into it, which in my opinion only bolsters their explicitly anti-fascist, anti-colonial, pro-trans sentiments, because in a world that conditions us to be apathetic cogs in a giant capitalist machine, there really is no greater act of resistance than just giving in to the primal urge to howl like a fucking werewolf. Just listen to the album, okay? So that's it. That's my list for February. Hopefully the March list will come out less late than this one did, but life is kind of crazy right now, so I really can't make any promises, unfortunately. Nonetheless, I hope you enjoyed this video, and be sure to look out for that Told Not to Worry interview. This has been Mavis Evelyn, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.